Awaken your spirit chosen ones. Some people watch you quietly, until one day they can't look away anymore. That's where this story begins, not with noise, not with drama, but with a shift so subtle you could have missed it if you weren't paying attention. Someone with real influence, someone whose decisions ripple through rooms you've never even stepped into, noticed two things about you. And the moment they saw those two things, the obsession began. Not romance, not admiration. Obsession. Because what they saw in you wasn't ordinary, wasn't accidental, and definitely wasn't something they could ignore. Here's the part most people never admit. Powerful individuals don't study the crowd. They study anomalies. They study anything that bends the pattern. And you've been bending patterns without even trying. Psychologists have a term for it: unintentional authority. It's when someone gains attention, respect, or influence not because they demanded it, but because their presence forces it. Only about 3% of people naturally have this trait, and you're one of them. Trust me, they've already done the math. And what happens when someone used to controlling the room suddenly meets someone who changes the temperature of that room without saying a word? Their mind locks in. Their curiosity refuses to let go. Think of it like giving a cat a laser pointer, except the cat runs a corporation, commands rooms or shapes narratives, and the laser pointer is, well, you. Congratulations. The irony is, you weren't performing. You weren't trying to impress anyone. Yet here you are, under the microscope of someone who rarely studies anyone at all. They notice two parts of you that most people overlook because they're too busy distracting themselves. But to this person, those two things weren't small. They were rare signals. Signals of potential, signals of depth, signals of someone who is becoming impossible to ignore. And once someone with serious power notices rarity, they don't forget it. They track it. They analyze it. They get hooked on it. They want to know what you'll do next, how far you'll go, and, if they're being totally honest, whether you might grow into someone who could stand beside them or surpass them. Either way, the obsession has already begun. Let's talk about why. Number one, they noticed you don't chase proximity, you create gravity. There's a certain type of person who doesn't need to push themselves into conversations, rooms, or circles. They don't campaign for approval or angle for acceptance. They move with a kind of quiet certainty that makes other people feel the need to move toward them. That's you. And that's the first thing someone with real power noticed, because people like them spend their entire lives surrounded by those who want something. They're used to being chased, praised, or strategically befriended. So when someone comes along who doesn't chase anything at all, it instantly stands out. You create gravity without trying. It's not charm, and it's not performance. It's the way you're comfortable being exactly where you are, without bending yourself to fit into anyone's world. You don't stretch your personality to please. You don't shrink it to blend in, and you don't inflate it to impress. You simply exist with a sense of inner solidity, and that alone is enough to pull attention. People feel it before they can explain it. They feel the stability, the independence, the quiet self-respect. And for someone powerful, that's the sort of energy that sets off alarms. Not the bad kind, but the kind that says, pay attention. You don't orbit around people. You choose your direction and let others decide whether they can keep up. That's rare. Most people adjust themselves constantly, just to maintain connection. But you're not afraid of being out of reach. You're not scared of losing access. You don't chase proximity, because you know proximity means nothing if it's forced. That level of self-possession is magnetic to someone who's used to artificial relationships. The obsession starts when they realize they can't pull you the way they pull everyone else. Your gravity works differently. It's not fueled by need. It's fueled by authenticity. You don't try to be wanted. You focus on being grounded. You don't try to be seen. You focus on being real. And the moment they sense that, they stop seeing you as just another person in the room. They start seeing you as a center of influence in your own right, someone who could change the balance if they ever fully understood their own pull. That's when fascination turns into fixation, and that's why they can't stop watching you now. Number 2, they realized you carry an inner world they can't enter without your permission. Some people are open books, full of highlighted sentences and footnotes, easy to read and easy to predict. You're not one of them. Your mind isn't loud and it isn't flashy, but it's private in a way that feels deliberate even when it isn't. You don't spill yourself out for anyone to scan, judge, or categorize. And that alone is enough to make someone with power stop and take notice, because power loves predictability. Power survives on knowing what people think, what they want, and how they can be influenced. When they meet someone they can't map, they get curious. When they meet someone they can't enter, they get obsessed. It isn't mystery for the sake of mystery. It's the fact that you have boundaries even in thought. You choose what to share, when to share it, and with whom. You're not performing transparency as if it's a moral requirement. You know that thinking deeply, feeling privately, and holding parts of yourself back isn't secrecy. It's self-respect. Most people have forgotten that distinction. They overshare because they're scared of being forgotten. You stay composed because you're not afraid of being misunderstood. And that shuts down a whole category of social manipulation before it even begins. When someone can't read you, they can't control you. When they can't predict you, they can't prepare for you. When they can't enter you, they can't own your narrative. To someone who has built their life on influence, that's like meeting a locked door in a hallway they've always walked without effort. What they saw in you wasn't coldness or distance, it was sovereignty. Ownership of your thoughts, ownership of your pace, ownership of what you choose to reveal. That kind of inner architecture is rare, and it can't be faked because people who fake it usually telegraph it. You don't telegraph anything, you just have it. So when they saw that, something clicked. Not danger, not hostility. Simply a sudden awareness that you're more than you give away and less than you could be. And that combination is irresistible to someone who's built their life on decoding people. They can't enter your inner world without your permission, and for reasons they probably won't admit even to themselves. They want that permission more than they expected. Number 3, they noticed you don't crumble under social pressure. You study it. Most people walk into a room already carrying a dictionary of expectations in their heads. They're busy checking boxes. Do I fit? Do they like me? Am I saying the right thing? Am I enough? And those questions shape them before they even open their mouths. You're different. When the social pressure starts pressing, you don't fold, you don't panic, and you don't rush to adjust yourself like a spare part being fitted into a machine. You pause, you observe, you take in the energy, the tone, the shifts in people's attention, and you understand it without being swallowed by it. That is what someone with real power noticed first, because power is basically social pressure turned up to full volume. When you can hold your shape under that kind of force, it signals something deeper than confidence. It signals awareness. You're not reacting to the room. You're reading it. You're not scrambling to be accepted. You're deciding whether acceptance is even worth your time. That alone is enough to set you apart, because it's a skill most people never develop. They're too busy surviving the moment to actually understand it. When people feel pressure, they instinctively try to blend in or stand out, often without knowing why. You do neither. You stay aligned with yourself. If the room wants you louder and you're not loud, you stay quiet. If the room wants you softer and you're not soft, you stay firm. That kind of emotional independence is unsettling in the best possible way. It forces others to confront the fact that you're not playing the game they thought everyone was playing. Someone powerful can spot that in seconds because it mirrors something they had to learn early on. Control isn't about overpowering the room. Control is about not losing yourself to it. When they saw you handle social pressure like it was a science project rather than a threat, they recognized a kindred trait, one they respect because it's rare, and one they can't teach because it has to come from within. The truth is, you're not immune to pressure, you're just fluent in it. And people who command rooms, who shape conversations, who influence outcomes, they're drawn to anyone who speaks that same silent language. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop watching you now. Number 4, they saw that your strengths are quiet, but your impact isn't. There's a special kind of strength that never announces itself, never demands applause, and never even tries to be noticed. Most people think strength is something you show. Loud confidence, bold moves, social dominance, or constant demonstration. But you don't operate like that. Your strength sits beneath the surface, calm, steady, and almost invisible until it isn't. Until people suddenly realize they've changed around you, thought differently because of you, or felt something shift without knowing why. Someone with power recognizes that pattern immediately because it's the same pattern that defines long-term influence. Loud strength burns fast. Quiet strength shapes slowly, deeply, and permanently. When you walk into a space, you don't rewrite the atmosphere with theatrics. You alter it by being consistent, grounded, and aligned with yourself. That's the kind of influence people can't trace but can always feel. The strange part is that you probably don't even think of these qualities as strengths. You're just being yourself. But to someone trained by life to judge value, to measure character, and to notice the subtle things most people miss, it's unmistakable. They see how people straighten up when you speak, how conflict cools around you, how younger or less confident people suddenly find their own footing in your presence. None of this is dramatic, none of it is intentional, but it's real and it's rare. What hooked them isn't that you can lead or persuade or inspire, it's that you do all three without stepping into those roles. You don't chase influence, yet influence trails behind you like a shadow that refuses to detach. That kind of impact can't be taught, can't be faked, and can't be replicated by people who mistake noise for power. And because it can't be quantified or boxed, it becomes fascinating. Someone powerful spends their life surrounded by people who perform strength because they're afraid of being weak. When they meet someone who simply has it, quietly, naturally, effortlessly, it disrupts their expectations. They saw that your impact isn't tied to volume or spectacle. It's tied to presence, integrity, and a kind of internal alignment most people never bother to develop. That's why they noticed. And that's why they're still thinking about you long after you've left the room. Number 5, they noticed you don't negotiate your self-respect. There's a quiet line people cross every day without realizing it. They trade a piece of their dignity for comfort, approval, or momentary peace. Most people can't help it because they've been taught that keeping the harmony matters more than keeping themselves intact. You aren't wired like that. When someone tries to treat you beneath your value, you don't argue, you don't beg, and you don't perform righteousness. You simply withdraw. You remove yourself from the equation, and in doing so, you state louder than any speech that you won't bargain with who you are. That's the first thing someone with power saw, and it jolted them. Because power attracts people who test boundaries, push limits, and treat respect like a negotiable currency. When they encounter someone who refuses to enter that marketplace, it disrupts their entire expectation of how social dynamics work. You don't raise your voice, you don't lecture, and you don't make a scene. You just stop giving energy to what doesn't deserve it. That is discipline most people can't even imagine, let alone practice. What makes it even more compelling is that you're not reacting out of ego or pride. You're reacting out of clarity. You know when something is beneath you, not because it insults you, but because it wastes you. And waste is something you don't tolerate in yourself. That awareness creates a kind of calm authority that people feel even when they can't name it. When someone powerful recognizes that, they feel an unexpected mix of respect and irritation. Respect because it takes strength to hold a line without turning it into a battle. Irritation because it means they can't maneuver you the way they maneuver others. You can't be guilted, cornered, flattered, intimidated, or sweet-talked into surrendering yourself. Most people mistake self-respect for stubbornness. You show them it's actually efficiency. You protect your time, your peace, and your identity by refusing to engage with disrespect at all. That's not emotional coldness, that's emotional maturity. And in a world full of people who blur their own boundaries to stay liked, you stand out like someone who's remembered an ancient skill everyone else has forgotten. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop thinking about how someone like you exists in a world trained to compromise itself. Number 6, they noticed you don't confuse attention with acceptance. Most people treat attention like a warm blanket they can't afford to lose. When someone important looks their way, they melt a little. They soften their boundaries, adjust their behavior, and suddenly start acting like whatever they were before isn't good enough anymore. You don't do that. When attention lands on you, you don't bow to it, you don't chase it, and you don't rewire yourself to keep it. You examine it, you weigh it, you decide whether it actually matters. That simple refusal to be dazzled is what someone with power saw and immediately felt drawn to. Because power is used to being treated like sunlight, people turn toward it instinctively, even when it burns them. When they meet someone who can stand in that light, feel its warmth, and still choose not to orbit around it, it shakes something deep in them. It exposes a truth most powerful people avoid. Influence is addictive, but being immune to it is unnerving. You understand on a practical level that attention is cheap. Anyone can hand it out like coupons. Acceptance is not. Acceptance is considered, earned, and aligned with who you actually are. You don't confuse the two because you've lived enough to know that being seen is not the same as being valued. And that clarity makes you impossible to manipulate, but also strangely compelling to observe. When someone powerful realizes they can't seduce you with status or impress you with titles, they get curious. They start wondering what actually moves you, what actually matters to you, and whether they'd ever be able to earn something deeper than a passing glance. Most people never make them ask those questions because most people never demand more than being noticed. There's humor in it too, because you're basically telling the universe, without saying a word, I'm not buying what you're selling today. And the universe, being used to customers, has to stop and think for a moment. That independence of judgment is rare. It's stabilizing. It's attractive in a way flattery can't compete with. It tells anyone watching that you know your own worth well enough to not let anyone redefine it for you, not even someone revered, feared, or admired. That's why they noticed, and that's why, for the first time in a long time, they're thinking harder about someone else than they ever expected to. Number 7, they recognize that you're emotionally disciplined, not emotionally detached. Most people get this mixed up, and it's why they misunderstand you so often. They see calm and assume coldness. They see restraint and think distance. They watch you hold yourself steady while everyone around you spirals, and they mistake that steadiness for absence. But someone with power, someone who's been through enough storms to know the difference, sees the truth immediately. You're not detached. You're trained by yourself. You're disciplined in a way that protects both your clarity and your humanity. Emotional discipline isn't about shutting down. It's about choosing not to surrender to every passing feeling like it's a command you have to obey. You feel deeply, you're just not ruled by it. When anger rises, You measure it before you act. When sadness shows up, you sit with it without letting it swallow you. When joy hits, you allow it without turning it into a performance. That balance is rare, and it signals emotional strength that can't be taught in a workshop or faked on social media. Someone with power recognizes this because they know what it's like to have their emotions used against them. They know how dangerous it is when people react before they think, when people spill before they process, when people choose chaos because it feels like authenticity. When they see someone rewriting that rule quietly, consistently, without fanfare, it feels like witnessing a kind of mastery. What fascinates them most is that your discipline makes you reliable without making you robotic. You don't shut people out. You don't build walls. You just build space. Space to think, space to respond, space to remain human even under pressure. That makes you someone who can be trusted, someone who can lead, someone who can be around without turning every interaction into emotional traffic. And because this quality is so misunderstood, it goes unnoticed by most. But not by someone trained to scan for it, someone who knows that emotional discipline is the backbone of resilience, leadership, and long-term influence. They saw in you a person who can hold complexity without collapsing, who can handle intensity without losing themselves, and who can care without burning out. That combination is rare enough to make anyone pay attention. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop wondering what else you're capable of when you keep this kind of mastery hidden in plain sight. Number 8, they saw you learn quietly, but apply loudly. There's a special rhythm to people who actually grow versus people who just talk about growing. Most people announce every step, what they're reading, what they're working on, what they plan to become. They treat progress like a status update. You don't do that. You take information in without noise. You test it without fanfare. And you apply it in ways that make people pause later and say, "When did that happen?" Someone with power saw that pattern, and it grabbed their attention like a spark in dry grass. Learning quietly isn't about being shy or secretive. It's about understanding that real skill is built in private and revealed in action. You're not chasing applause, so you're not distracted by it. You're not performing progress, so you actually make progress. When others are busy curating a version of themselves for public consumption, you're busy becoming someone capable in ways that can't be photographed or captioned. When you apply what you've learned, it hits people like sudden clarity. One day you're handling conversations with precision you didn't have before. One day you're solving problems faster than anyone else in the room. One day your insight slices through confusion like it was always meant to. None of it feels like a stunt. It feels like inevitability, and that's what people can't stop noticing. Someone with power recognizes this instantly because power is built the same way. Study quietly, execute boldly, let results do the talking. When they saw you follow that philosophy without even naming it, it told them two things. First, that you have discipline, because it takes discipline to study without craving recognition. And second, that you have competence, because it takes competence for application to look effortless. There's also something unnerving about it in a good way. They can't predict your next leap because they don't know what you're working on until it's already transformed into action. That unpredictability isn't chaos. It's capability hiding in plain sight. People get obsessed with potential because potential promises change. You don't just promise it, you demonstrate it. That's why they noticed, and that's why they're watching, waiting to see what you'll quietly master next before the rest of the world even realizes you've crossed another line they can't yet see. Number 9. They noticed you don't use your potential as decoration. You treat it like obligation. Most people talk about potential the way they talk about dreams, like something soft, pretty, and optional. They frame it in their minds. They show it off when it's convenient, and then they leave it in a corner, gathering dust. They say things like, "I could have been," or "I might still," as if potential is a trophy they can admire without ever lifting. You're not like that. When someone with power saw how you handled your own potential, it stopped them cold. You treat potential like responsibility, not decoration. You don't sit around admiring what you could be, because you know that potential without action is just a fantasy you let yourself get comfortable in. When you feel a capability waking up inside you, you don't celebrate it. You work on it. When you see a weakness, you don't excuse it. You correct it. When you notice a gift, you don't brag about it. You refine it. That mindset is terrifying in the best way, because it means you can't be satisfied with mediocrity, even if you wanted to. You don't chase greatness for applause. You chase it because you can't stand the idea of leaving part of yourself unused. That kind of internal obligation is something people with real influence instantly respect, because it's the same engine that built their own trajectory. What hooked them wasn't talent. Talent is common. What hooked them wasn't ambition. Ambition is loud and everywhere. What hooked them was responsibility, the quiet decision to treat your potential like a promise you owe yourself and the world, not a crown you can wear in your imagination. When someone sees that, they understand something about you that most people miss. You're not waiting for permission. You're not waiting for the right moment. You're not waiting for recognition. You're already moving, already shaping, already building in the only place that actually matters, your daily choices. And that kind of self-driven growth is addictive to watch because it tells a story without speaking. If this person keeps going, they will outgrow the version of themselves everyone has already underestimated. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop thinking about how far someone like you can actually go once you stop treating potential like decoration and start turning it into reality. Number 10, they saw that you're not impressed by power. You're aware of its vulnerabilities. Most people treat power like a mythic creature, larger than life, flawless, untouchable. They bow without thinking because they've been taught that authority automatically equals superiority. You don't do that. When you look at someone powerful, you don't get dazzled. You get observant. You notice the cracks in the armor, the fear beneath the confidence, the loneliness beneath the control. And you don't exploit it. You simply understand it. Someone with power feels that understanding like a sudden chill, not because it's threatening, but because it's rare. Very few people can see through slowly built facades without turning it into gossip, mockery, or disrespect. You see it without cruelty and without awe, and that combination is something they've almost never encountered. Power is built on perception, but it is also built on insecurity. People in high positions know this intimately. They spend years learning to mask it. When they meet someone who can read those masks without flinching or worshipping, it forces them into honesty they don't usually allow themselves. You remind them that underneath the title, the influence, the control, there's still a human being juggling fear, doubt, and responsibility. That kind of grounded insight is like handing someone a mirror they didn't ask for but desperately needed. And it's strangely addictive. Because when you treat them like a person instead of a force, you give them something they get very rarely: realness. Most people approach power looking for favor, protection, or status. You approach it with awareness and equilibrium. You're not rude, you're not cold, and you're not disrespectful. You simply don't confuse the size of someone's influence with the size of their worth. You understand that power can be misused, misunderstood, and even hollow when it isn't tied to character. That awareness makes you impossible to manipulate, but also deeply compelling to someone tired of being surrounded by sycophants or strategists. You're one of the few who can stand in the presence of power and remain fully yourself. That's why they noticed. And that's why, for the first time in a long time, they feel seen not as a figure, but as a flaw-filled, growth-driven human being. And that realization keeps pulling them back toward you. Number 11. They realized you possess moral independence. Most people borrow their opinions the way they borrow clothes. Whatever fits the moment, whatever keeps them accepted, whatever avoids conflict. They adapt not because they've thought deeply, but because they're tired of standing alone. You don't do that. When a moral question shows up, you don't look around for the popular answer. You look inward. You weigh it, test it, and decide on it, even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. That quiet, stubborn honesty is exactly what caught the attention of someone with power. Powerful people live in environments where everyone is constantly performing morality, where people pretend to hold values they don't actually practice, because it keeps the peace or protects their own advantage. When they meet someone whose morals aren't costumes but convictions, it feels like oxygen after years in a closed room. Moral independence isn't loud righteousness, it's clarity. It's the ability to say, this is where I stand, without turning it into a war or a sermon. It's knowing that integrity isn't something you flex when everyone is watching. It's something you keep when they aren't. And it's trusting yourself enough to hold a position even when it costs you comfort or applause. When someone with power realizes you have that, it shakes their assumptions about people. Because moral independence can't be bought, manipulated, or pressured. It can't be silenced by threats or sweetened by reward. It is, by definition, self-governed. And anyone who has spent their life surrounded by moral followers rather than moral thinkers feels that like discovering a rare artifact. It also makes you unpredictable in the healthiest way. Not unreliable, but uncompromising in the areas that actually matter. You don't flip your values to fit convenience, and you don't abandon them to fit popularity. That signals maturity, courage, and an internal compass that most people never develop because it's easier not to. And here's the deeper truth. When they saw that in you, they saw someone who cannot be weaponized by groupthink, cannot be swayed by ambition, and cannot be turned against their own conscience. In a world where moral compromise is the real currency, you're walking around carrying something priceless. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop thinking about what it would mean to stand beside someone who can't be bent, bought, or broken by the noise of the crowd. Number 12. They noticed your presence reveals other people's insecurities. There's a kind of person who walks into a space and makes everyone feel bigger. Then there's a kind of person who walks in and makes everyone feel honest, even when they weren't planning to be. You're that second kind, and it's not something people talk about because it's uncomfortable to admit. But someone with power saw it instantly, because they've learned to read not just what people say, but what people feel when someone is near. You don't expose anyone on purpose. You don't call them out. You don't perform moral superiority. You just exist with a level of self-awareness and grounded confidence that acts like a mirror. When people stand next to someone who is at peace with themselves, it forces an internal check. Am I at peace? Am I being honest? Am I living the way I say I am? Most people avoid those questions like they're poison, but you make them unavoidable without ever speaking a word. Insecurity is usually hidden under layers of humor, aggression, distraction, or charm. But when someone carries clarity the way you do, those layers peel off naturally. People suddenly feel seen, not by you, but by themselves. And that can be jarring. It can also be transformative. Someone with power recognizes this effect because it's the same effect that real leaders have, the same effect therapists have, the same effect wise people have without trying. When you're around, people can't pretend as easily. They can't lie to themselves as comfortably. And in that moment, they either grow or they panic. The fascinating part, and the part that hooked them, is that you don't take responsibility for their growth or their panic. You don't lecture, you don't coach, you don't even notice half the time. Your presence causes the shift, not your intention. Most people run from mirrors because they don't like what they might see. Someone with power learned a long time ago that growth only happens when you stop running. When they saw that you naturally created that kind of honesty in others, they recognized influence in its purest form, the ability to reveal truth without force. That's why they noticed. And that's why they can't stop watching, because you remind people of who they could be, even when they're terrified to look at it. Number 13. They saw that you're becoming someone who can't be ignored, even in a crowded room. There's a moment in a person's growth where their influence stops being something they try to build and starts being something they can't hide. Most people stay forever in the phase of wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to matter. You're slipping out of that phase without even realizing it. And that shift is exactly what caught the attention of someone with power. When you walk into a crowded room now, you don't dominate it and you don't compete with it. You shape it simply by being consistent, calm, and unmistakably yourself. People feel it before they can name it. A slight change in tone, a drift in attention, a soft recalibration in their own behavior. It's not about charisma or performance. It's about coherence. Your thoughts, actions, and presence line up in a way that makes people trust you without needing reasons. Someone powerful has spent years surrounded by noise, people fighting for relevance, people crafting personalities, people performing competence they haven't earned yet. When they meet someone who has actual substance, it stands out like a clean note in a broken chord. The deeper truth is this: you're becoming impossible to ignore, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. Your boundaries are firm, your mind is sharp, your heart is steady, and your intentions are readable without being exposed. That clarity acts like a beacon, but not in the flashy sense, in the "this person knows who they are" sense. Most people spend their entire life trying to get people to pay attention. You're reaching a point where attention is a byproduct, not a goal. When that happens, influence stops being something you chase and starts being something you carry. Someone with power recognizes that trajectory instantly because they've lived it. They know how rare it is, how dangerous it can be when misused, and how transformative it can be when handled with integrity. So when they saw you not performing, not striving, not begging, but simply being someone whose presence shifts the room without forcing it, they understood they were looking at a future they couldn't ignore. That's why they noticed. And that's why they're still watching, aware that you're growing into someone the world will eventually have to pay attention to, whether it wants to or not. Number 14. They recognize that you carry potential that threatens stagnation. There's a particular kind of potential that isn't about talent or ambition or even intelligence. It's about momentum, the kind that keeps moving even when the world around it is tired, comfortable, or stuck. Most people fade into their environment because it's easier to stop evolving than to challenge the ground they're standing on. You don't do that. You keep expanding, refining, adjusting, becoming, even when no one is watching and no reward is promised. And someone with power felt that, like a disturbance in a calm lake. Stagnation is the silent enemy of anyone who actually cares about progress, influence, or legacy. People who have built something know that the real threat isn't competition, it's complacency. When they saw you, they saw life in motion, not frozen potential. They saw someone who would eventually disrupt whatever predictable pattern they were expected to fit into. There's something unsettling about watching a person grow at a pace they can't categorize. Institutions rely on predictable people. Systems rely on people who stay in their lane. Hierarchies rely on people who accept their place. When someone comes along who can't be boxed, can't be slowed, can't be smoothed into a shape that fits. It forces everyone around them to reevaluate the rules they've been playing by. What hooked them isn't that you might succeed. Plenty of people succeed. What hooked them is that you would succeed on your own terms, through your own discipline, through growth that can't be outsourced or suppressed. When someone has that kind of internal engine, they can't be managed the way others can. That's when obsession stops being about curiosity and starts being about possibility. They start asking, what happens if this person reaches their full capability? What happens when someone like that stops being overlooked and starts being unavoidable? What happens when their growth forces everyone else to either rise or admit they've been sitting still? You're not a threat in the dramatic sense. You're a threat in the evolutionary sense, the kind that reminds people that change is always possible, even when they've convinced themselves it isn't. That's why they noticed, and that's why they can't stop watching, because you carry a kind of forward motion that makes stagnation look ashamed of itself. When you strip all of this down, what this whole story really reveals isn't about them. It's about you. It's about qualities you didn't even know you carried, strengths you never advertised, and depth you never felt the need to defend. The truth is, people with real influence can't help but notice authenticity, because authenticity is the one thing they can't manufacture, buy, or command. They can't create gravity, they can't force moral independence, they can't teach emotional discipline, and they can't fake presence. When they see it in someone else, it stops them in their tracks. You didn't get this attention by chasing it, performing for it, or compromising for it. You earned it simply by being aligned with yourself in a world that constantly encourages people to twist, bend, and shrink just to fit. What they saw in you was not perfection. It was integrity in motion. It was clarity in a fog of confusion. It was growth in a culture of stagnation. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need their obsession, their validation, or their approval for any of this to matter. The fact that you naturally embody these qualities means you're already walking a path most people never even find, let alone stay on. Whether anyone notices or not, you're building a character that will always command respect, always inspire reflection, and always shift the room without saying a word. So take this not as a warning, not as a hype, but as a reminder. Keep being the person who grows when others stop, who stays grounded when others panic, and who stays real when everyone else is playing a role. That is influence, that is power, and that is rare. If this video opened your eyes even a little, then do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the deeper conversations. Like the video if it resonated. Comment below with what part hit you the hardest, because I read every word, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for being here, and keep becoming someone even you haven't fully met yet. Stay awakened, chosen ones.